One morning, I woke up to find my salary cut by $3,200 overnight, with no notice or explanation. I couldn't believe my eyes. And as I dug deeper, I discovered this wasn't a mistake, but a deliberate strategy. And my revenge would destroy a $1.3 billion IPO, leaving everyone terrified. My name is Laura Mitchell, and for the past 8 years, I've been a senior technical specialist at InnovateX. Not to sound arrogant, but I'm the backbone of this company's infrastructure. Every critical system, every technological advancement that's propelled us to the brink of a billion-dollar public offering. I built it. My fingerprints are on everything from our proprietary algorithms to the custom security protocols that protect our intellectual property. In Silicon Valley's cutthroat ecosystem, I'm what they call irreplaceable. Or at least, I thought I was. I first noticed something was wrong when my phone buzzed at 3:17 a.m. A notification from my banking app, payroll deposit, $7,800. Half asleep, I dismissed it, assuming it was the usual bi-weekly deposit. It wasn't until my alarm went off at 6:30 a.m. that the discrepancy hit me. My normal deposit should have been $11,000. I checked again, now fully awake, heart pounding. The number hadn't changed, $7,800. A 30% pay cut, no warning, no email, no meeting. My first thought was a payroll error. These things happen, right? I showered quickly, skipped breakfast, and drove to the office, arriving before even the earliest birds. The payroll department wouldn't open until 9 a.m., so I sat up at my desk, trying to focus on coding a new security patch. The lines of code blurred before my eyes as my mind kept returning to those missing digits, $3,200. At precisely 9:01 a.m., I was standing at Maureen's desk in payroll, trying to keep my voice level. "Morning, Laura." Maureen's smile faltered when she saw my expression. "Everything okay?" "My salary deposit is short by $3,200. Was there some kind of system error?" Maureen's fingers flew across her keyboard. "Let me check." Her brow furrowed as she stared at her screen. "That's odd. I'm seeing an authorized adjustment to your compensation, effective immediately. But there's no accompanying documentation." She looked up at me. "Usually, these changes come with proper paperwork, a performance review, a company-wide adjustment, something. Who authorized it?" "It came directly from the executive level. That's all I can see." The executive level. In other words, Richard Jameson, our CEO. I thanked Maureen and walked back to my desk in a daze. Richard had never so much as spoken to me about my performance. We'd had exactly 3 one-on-one conversations in 8 years, all of them positive. The last one, just 2 months ago, had ended with him saying, "People like you are why InnovateX will make history." I spent the morning going through my emails, looking for any hint of what might have prompted this. Had I missed something? A policy change? A performance issue? Nothing. My last performance review, conducted by my direct supervisor, Maya Patel, had rated me exceptional across all categories. At lunch, I sought out Maya in the cafeteria. She was sitting alone, picking at a salad and reading something on her tablet. "Maya, do you have a minute?" She looked up, surprised. "Laura, sure, everything okay?" I slid into the seat across from her. "Did you know about my salary cut?" Maya's face showed genuine shock. "What? No, what are you talking about?" I explained what had happened. As I spoke, Maya's expression changed from surprise to confusion to something that looked suspiciously like fear. "I had no idea," she said, her voice lowered. "No one consulted me. That's not how these things are supposed to work." She hesitated. "Have you spoken to Richard?" "Not yet. I wanted to talk to you first." Maya pushed her salad away. "Laura, there's something you should know. I wasn't supposed to tell anyone yet, but given the circumstances." She glanced around to make sure no one was listening. "Richard is bringing someone new into the technical team, a woman named Amy Turner." "In what capacity?" "Senior Technical Director, above your position." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. But that's not even a position we have in our structure. It is now. They created it last week. Who is she? Where's she coming from? Maya hesitated again. She was at Vertex Solutions, junior developer. Richard met her at a conference 3 months ago. Something wasn't adding up. Junior developer to senior technical director. That's not just a promotion. That's unheard of. Maya looked uncomfortable. There are rumors. I didn't need her to finish that sentence. In the tech world, where men still outnumbered women significantly, especially at the top, I'd seen this story play out before, but never at InnovateX. Never with Richard, who had always seemed better than that. When does she start? She already has, Monday. Richard wants you to train her. And there it was. The missing piece. My salary cut wasn't about performance or company adjustments. It was leverage. A message train Amy Turner or watch your compensation continue to dwindle. I spent the afternoon in a fog, mechanically going through my tasks while my mind raced. At 4:30 p.m., an email arrived from Richard's assistant. Mr. Jameson would like to see you in his office at 5:00 p.m. today. Richard's office occupied the entire northeast corner of our top floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of San Francisco Bay. As I entered, he was standing with his back to me, looking out at the water. At 45, Richard Jameson still had the lean build and restless energy of the college athlete he'd once been. His dark hair was expensively cut, with just enough gray at the temples to convey gravitas without suggesting age. Laura, come in, he said without turning around. Close the door. I did as instructed, then stood waiting. Richard finally turned, gesturing to one of the sleek chairs in front of his desk. Have a seat. I remained standing. I'd prefer to know why my salary was cut by 30% without notice or explanation. Richard smiled thinly. Direct as always, it's one of your better qualities. He moved to his chair and sat down. Your compensation was adjusted to reflect changing priorities within the company. What changing priorities? As you may have heard, we've brought on a new senior technical director, Amy Turner. Brilliant mind. Harvard Computer Science. She's going to be leading our infrastructure team through the IPO and beyond. Every word was a carefully constructed lie. I knew for a fact that Amy Turner had attended a small state college and had less than 2 years of professional experience. But I kept my face neutral. And my role in this new structure? You'll be working with Amy, showing her the ropes, making sure she understands our systems. Richard leaned forward. It's a critical transition period. Laura, the IPO is just months away. We need everyone rowing in the same direction. And if I'm not interested in this new arrangement, Richard's smile disappeared. Then the company will have to reevaluate your position further. Look, Laura, you've been valuable to InnovateX. No one's denying that. But we're moving into a new phase. We need different leadership styles, fresh perspectives. What he meant was, we need someone who won't question me. Someone who owes me everything. I see, I said, and the salary adjustment reflects your new responsibilities. If things go well with Amy's transition, we can revisit it after the IPO. Translation play nice, keep quiet, and maybe you'll get your money back once I've cashed out my shares. When do I start training Amy? Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., she'll come to your workspace. Richard stood up, signaling the end of our conversation. I'm counting on you, Laura. This IPO means everything to InnovateX, to all of us. As I turned to leave, he added, Oh, and Laura. This conversation, my candor about Amy's role and your compensation, I'd appreciate if we kept it between us. Team morale and all that. I nodded and left without another word. As I walked back to my desk, my mind was already calculating. Planning. Richard had made a critical error. He thought my value to the company was as a trainer, a stopgap measure until Amy could take over. He didn't realize or had forgotten that I was much more than that. I was the keystone. The next morning, I arrived at work earlier than usual. I wanted time to prepare, both mentally and practically. I made a cup of coffee and began systematically documenting everything I knew about our systems, not for Amy, but for myself. Every password, every backdoor, every custom solution I'd implemented over the years, knowledge that lived only in my head. At precisely 9:00 a.m., a young woman approached my desk. She was perhaps 25, with carefully styled blonde hair and an outfit that looked more appropriate for a fashion magazine than a tech company. She extended her hand. "You must be Laura. I'm Amy Turner. Richard said you'd be showing me around the systems today." I shook her hand briefly. "That's right, have a seat." Amy sat down, placing an expensive-looking handbag on the floor beside her. "I'm so excited to be working with you. Richard has told me so much about what you've built here." I doubted that very much. "Let's start with the basics. What's your background in system architecture?" Amy's smile faltered slightly. "Well, I was at Vertex for a while, mostly front-end development, but I'm a quick learner. Front-end development, building user interfaces. About as far from my infrastructure work as you could get while still being in tech. This wasn't just a stretch assignment, it was absurd." "I see. And what experience do you have with distributed systems, Kubernetes, AWS architecture?" Amy shifted uncomfortably. "I haven't worked directly with those, but I understand the concepts." I spent the next hour asking Amy technical questions, each one revealing another gap in her knowledge. It wasn't her fault she was clearly out of her depth, placed in a position she wasn't qualified for. By lunchtime, I had confirmed what I already suspected: Amy Turner had no business being a senior technical director. She would be completely dependent on others on me to do her job. As we broke for lunch, Amy tried to maintain her cheerful facade. "This is all so fascinating. I can tell I'm going to learn so much from you." "Amy," I said carefully, "I'm curious, how did you and Richard meet?" A slight blush crept into her cheeks. "At the Tech Forward conference, I was presenting a small panel on user experience design, and he was in the audience. We got talking afterward." She didn't need to continue. The story wrote itself from there: drinks, dinner, hotel room, the oldest narrative in the corporate world. "Richard mentioned you'll be leading the infrastructure team through the IPO, I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Yes, isn't it exciting? Richard says it could be worth up to $1.3 billion. Everyone's going to make so much money." She leaned forward conspiratorially. "He's already talking about the house we might buy in Atherton." I wondered if she realized what she'd just revealed. Not just the relationship, which was hardly a secret at this point, but the shared financial future they were planning, funded by InnovateX's public offering. Over the next week, I continued training Amy. In reality, I was conducting a thorough assessment of exactly how vulnerable our systems would be if I were to step away. Each night, I documented my findings in encrypted files stored on my personal devices. Each morning, I arrived early to prepare for another day of charade. Amy, for her part, seemed increasingly uncomfortable with the arrangement. I could tell she was smart enough to know she was out of her depth, but trapped by the opportunity Richard had presented. A few times, I caught her looking at me with what seemed like genuine regret. "Laura," she said one afternoon, when we were alone in the conference room, "I know this is awkward. I want you to know I really do respect your work. Richard says you're brilliant." "Then why am I training my replacement?" The words slipped out before I could stop them. Amy looked stricken. "It's not like that. He says there's room for both of us." "Is that what he says when you're alone, when you're talking about that house in Atherton?" Her face went pale. "He told you about that?" "No, Amy, you did." She gathered her things quickly. "I should go. I have a meeting with Richard." I watched her hurry away, feeling a strange mix of pity and determination. Amy was a pawn in Richard's game, just as I was. The difference was, I knew the board better than either of them. That evening, I received another email adjustment notice. My salary had been cut by another $1,000. No explanation, no meeting, just a digital notification that my value to the company had decreased further. Two could play at that game. The next morning, I called in sick. It was the first sick day I'd taken in 3 years. I spent it at home, finalizing my strategy. By evening, I had what I needed: a complete understanding of my leverage points within InnovateX. The most critical was this: as the architect of the company's core systems, I was the sole signatory on several critical compliance documents required for the IPO. These weren't just formalities, they were legally binding attestations that our infrastructure met the stringent requirements for a public offering. Without my signature, those documents couldn't be filed. Richard had clearly forgotten this detail. Or perhaps he assumed I would sign regardless of how I was treated. He was wrong. I returned to work the following day to find Amy sitting at my desk, looking through my files. She jumped when she saw me. "Laura, Richard asked me to review some of the architecture documents while you were out. Find anything interesting?" She flushed. "Not really. It's all very complex." "That's because it is complex. Amy, it took me 8 years to build these systems. You can't learn them in a week, or a month, or probably even a year." She stood up, gathering her things. "Richard says I'm a quick study." I'm sure he does. But the SEC doesn't care what Richard says. They care about reality. Amy looked confused. "The SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, the people who have to approve our IPO, they require certain guarantees about our technical infrastructure, signatures from qualified personnel." "Oh, I'm sure Richard has all that handled." I smiled thinly. "I'm sure he thinks he does." Over the next 2 weeks, I watched as Amy was increasingly included in high-level meetings that I was excluded from. I saw my name removed from key distribution lists. I noticed how managers who had once sought my input now directed their questions to Amy, who would inevitably have to come to me later for the answers. I did my job. I answered questions when asked. I kept the systems running, but I didn't volunteer information. I didn't point out the weaknesses in plans being made without my input. I simply watched and waited. The IPO preparation was moving into high gear. Investment bankers were constantly in the building. Legal teams worked late into the night. Marketing prepared for the media blitz that would accompany the public announcement. And through it all, Richard paraded Amy around like a trophy, introducing her as the technical genius behind InnovateX's infrastructure. I heard about these meetings secondhand, from colleagues who were uncomfortable with the fiction being presented but too afraid for their own positions to speak up. My salary was cut twice more, bringing the total reduction to $500, exactly half of my original compensation. The message was clear: submit or be pushed out entirely. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. 3 weeks before the planned IPO filing date, I received an email from the legal department. Urgent infrastructure compliance documentation required. Attached were the forms that needed my signature, my specific signature, as the qualified technical lead responsible for the systems. I didn't respond. 2 days later, a more urgent email arrived. Critical IPO documentation outstanding. Again, I didn't respond. On the 3rd day, Maya appeared at my desk, looking stressed. "Laura, have you seen the emails from legal? They're freaking out about some forms you need to sign." I looked up calmly from my screen. "Yes, I've seen them." "So, are you going to sign them?" "I'm considering my options." Maya glanced around nervously. "Laura, what's going on?" "These are mandatory for the IPO. If they don't get filed, then the IPO doesn't happen," I finished for her. "At least not on schedule." Maya's eyes widened. "Is this about Amy, about the salary cuts?" "It's about recognizing value. Maya, mine, yours, everyone's who actually built this company versus those who are trying to cash in on our work." "You could get fired for this." I smiled. "They can fire me, but they can't force me to sign those documents. And without them, there's no IPO." Maya looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "What can I do?" "Just watch and be ready." The next morning, I was summoned to a conference room. Inside were Richard, our chief legal officer, Patricia Winters, and 2 men in expensive suits who I assumed were from our investment banking partners. Richard's face was a mask of controlled anger. "Laura, these gentlemen are from Goldman Sachs. They're handling our IPO. We seem to have a situation with some compliance documentation. Patricia slid a folder across the table toward me. These forms require your signature as the technical architect of record. They certify that our systems meet all SEC requirements for a public offering. I opened the folder and glanced at the documents. Yes, I'm familiar with these. They were due to be filed yesterday. One of the bankers said, "The delay is causing concerns." "I understand," I said, closing the folder without signing. "I have some concerns of my own." Richard's jaw tightened. "Whatever concerns you have can be addressed after the IPO. Right now, we need those signatures." Actually, my concerns relate directly to the IPO, specifically to the accuracy of these documents. The room went silent. Patricia spoke first, her voice careful. "What do you mean by accuracy, Laura?" "These forms require me to certify that the technical leadership team understands and can maintain the infrastructure. That simply isn't true." Richard stood up abruptly. "Gentlemen, would you give us a moment with Ms. Mitchell?" The bankers exchanged glances, then left the room. As soon as the door closed, Richard turned on me. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" "My job. These certifications require truth. I can't sign them as they stand." Patricia looked between us, clearly sensing the tension. "Perhaps we can revise the language." "The language isn't the problem," I interrupted. "The reality is, you've placed someone with no relevant experience in charge of critical systems. I cannot legally certify that she understands or can maintain them." "This is about Amy." Richard's voice was dangerous now. "You're holding up a billion-dollar IPO because you're jealous." "This isn't about jealousy, Richard. It's about integrity, both professional and personal." Richard's face flushed. "You're fired, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building." I stayed calm. "You can fire me, but I still won't sign those documents. And without them, you have no IPO." Patricia cleared her throat. "Richard, perhaps we should discuss this privately." "There's nothing to discuss," he snapped. "She's trying to sabotage the company out of spite." "I'm trying to prevent fraud," I corrected. "Certifying that Amy Turner is qualified to lead our technical infrastructure would be a false statement to the SEC. That's securities fraud, Richard. It carries criminal penalties." The color drained from Patricia's face. She was a lawyer. She understood exactly what I was saying. "If you fire me now," I continued, "I'll be obligated to inform the SEC of why I refused to sign. Do you want to explain to them about Amy's qualifications, about how you cut my salary when I wouldn't train her? About the house in Atherton you're planning to buy together with IPO money?" Richard looked like he might actually strike me. Patricia placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Let's all take a step back," she said. "Laura, what would it take for you to sign these documents?" "Truth," I said simply. "Amy needs to be removed from her position. I need to be restored to my proper role and compensation. And we need a full technical review to ensure nothing has been compromised during this transition period." "That's blackmail," Richard hissed. "No, it's accountability," I replied. "You tried to replace me with someone unqualified because of a personal relationship. You punished me financially when I wouldn't cooperate. Those are the facts." Patricia looked at Richard. "We should discuss our options." "There are no options," he insisted. "We're 3 weeks from IPO. We can't make these kinds of changes now." "You can't file without these documents either," I pointed out. "And I'm not the only one who knows the truth. How many people in this company do you think are aware of what's really going on with Amy? How many would testify if the SEC started asking questions?" The threat hung in the air. Silicon Valley was built on carefully constructed narratives. The right story could make a company worth billions. The wrong one could destroy it overnight. "I need to consult with the board," Richard finally said. "Do that," I agreed, standing up. "I'll be at my desk." As I walked out, I heard Patricia's voice, low but distinct. "Richard, if what she's saying is true, we have a serious problem." I spent the rest of the day at my desk, working as usual. No security came to escort me out. No one approached me about the forms. It was as if the entire executive level of the company had gone silent. The next morning, I arrived to find my system's access unchanged. Still no word from Richard or Patricia. But at 10:30 a.m., I received a calendar invite, Board of Directors Emergency Meeting, 1:00 p.m. My name was on the attendee list. I'd never been invited to a board meeting before. This was either very good or very bad. At 12:58 p.m., I entered the largest conference room on the executive floor. Inside were the 7 members of InnovateX's board, plus Patricia, Richard, and surprisingly Maya. Richard looked like he hadn't slept. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Elaine Berger, the board chair, nodded to me as I took a seat. Ms. Mitchell, thank you for joining us. We understand there's a situation regarding the IPO documentation. Yes, that's correct. Patricia has outlined your concerns. We'd like to hear directly from you. For the next 20 minutes, I explained everything: Amy's sudden appearance, her lack of qualifications, the progressive cuts to my salary, the exclusion from critical meetings. I was clinical, focusing on facts rather than emotions. When I finished, the room was silent. Finally, Elaine spoke again. Mr. Jameson, would you care to respond? Richard straightened in his chair. What Laura is describing is a standard organizational transition. Yes, we brought in new leadership. Yes, we adjusted compensation to reflect changing roles. But there was no impropriety. And Ms. Turner's qualifications, asked another board member. Amy is extremely talented. Her background may be non-traditional, but she has less than 2 years of professional experience, all in front-end development. I interrupted. She has no background in infrastructure, security, or compliance, the areas she's supposedly leading for our IPO. Elaine turned to Maya. Ms. Patel, as engineering director, what's your assessment of Ms. Turner's qualifications? Maya looked uncomfortable but determined. Amy is intelligent and eager to learn, but she is not qualified for the role she's been given, not even close. She regularly has to come to Laura for answers to basic questions. And your understanding of their relationship? Elaine nodded toward Richard. Maya hesitated. It's commonly understood within the company that Mr. Jameson and Ms. Turner are involved personally. Richard slammed his hand on the table. This is character assassination. Yes, Amy and I have a relationship. It began after she was hired. That's not true, I said quietly. Amy told me you met at a conference 3 months ago. She's only been with the company for 3 weeks. The board members exchanged glances. Patricia closed her eyes briefly, as if in pain. Elaine Berger's voice was steel. Mr. Jameson, did you create a senior position for someone you were romantically involved with? Did you then attempt to force Ms. Mitchell to train this person by cutting her salary? This is being blown completely out of proportion. Yes or no, Richard? Richard's facade finally cracked. The IPO is 3 weeks away. 3 weeks. We're talking about more than $1 billion. Are we really going to let one disgruntled employee derail everything we've built? If that employee is right about securities fraud, then yes, said another board member, because the alternative is much worse. The meeting continued for another hour. Questions were asked, documents were reviewed. Maya confirmed that my technical expertise was essential and irreplaceable in the short term. Patricia outlined the legal risks of proceeding with the IPO under the current circumstances. Finally, Elaine called for a board vote. Richard was asked to leave the room. I was allowed to stay. The vote was unanimous. Richard Jameson would be placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. The IPO would be delayed. I would be restored to my position with full compensation, plus damages for the salary that had been withheld. As the meeting concluded, Elaine approached me directly. Ms. Mitchell, on behalf of the board, I apologize for what you've experienced. We failed in our oversight. Thank you, I said. What happens now? We clean house, starting at the top. She glanced toward the door Richard had exited through. The IPO will proceed when we're ready, properly ready, with qualified leadership and without complications. And Elaine's expression hardened. Ms. Turner's employment is being terminated, effective immediately. As I walked back to my desk, I felt strangely empty. I had won. But at what cost? An IPO delayed, possibly for months. Hundreds of employees whose expected windfalls would now be postponed. A company in turmoil. But as I sat down at my computer, an email arrived from Maya, emergency all-hands meeting, 3:30 p.m. today. The subject line was simply, moving forward. I attended that meeting, standing at the back of the room as Elaine Berger addressed the entire company. She was direct about what had happened: improper hiring practices, misrepresentation of qualifications, attempts to manipulate employees through compensation. She didn't name names, but she didn't have to. Everyone knew. The IPO has been postponed, she announced, to audible gasps. But not cancelled. We will proceed when our house is in order, when our leadership has integrity, and when our documentation reflects the truth about who we are and what we've built. After the meeting, colleagues stopped by my desk. Some offered quiet thanks, others just nodded in recognition. A few looked resentful, those who had been counting on immediate IPO riches. But most seemed to understand that what had happened was necessary, even if painful. That evening, as I was preparing to leave, Maya approached my desk. The board has asked me to take over as interim CEO, she said, still sounding surprised by this development. My first official act was to restore your original salary, plus a 20% increase, and back pay for everything that was withheld. Thank you. Don't thank me. It's the least we owe you. She hesitated. Laura, I want you to consider a new position, Chief Technology Officer. We need someone with your expertise at the executive level. Someone with integrity. I was stunned. CTO, are you serious? Completely. The board has already approved it. You'd report directly to me. I'd need to think about it. Maya nodded. Of course. Take your time. She started to walk away, then turned back. For what it's worth, what you did took incredible courage. You saved this company from disaster. A lot of people won't understand that. But I do. 6 months later, InnovateX finally had its IPO. The valuation wasn't quite the $1.3 billion that Richard had promised. It was $1.8 billion. As it turned out, investors valued actual technical expertise and ethical leadership over flashy promises. Richard Jameson never returned to the company. The investigation revealed other improprieties beyond Amy Turner: financial misstatements, personal expenses charged to the company, promises made to investors that couldn't be kept. He avoided criminal charges by agreeing to a settlement with the SEC, including a lifetime ban from serving as an officer of a public company. Amy disappeared from Silicon Valley entirely. I heard she moved back to her hometown in the Midwest. I didn't wish her ill. She had been a pawn in Richard's game, even if a willing one. As for me, I accepted the CTO position. My first major initiative was to implement a transparent compensation system across the company, ending the practice of secret salary adjustments. My second was to create a technical mentorship program for employees, particularly women, who wanted to advance their careers legitimately. On the day of the IPO, standing on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, Maya handed me the ceremonial bell-ringing hammer. You should do the honors, she said. None of us would be here without you. As I rang the bell, signaling the start of InnovateX's life as a public company, I thought about power: how it's gained, how it's used, how it's lost. Richard had wielded his power like a club, crushing those who stood in his way. In the end, his power had been illusory, built on manipulation and fear. Real power, I had learned, comes from knowledge, from integrity, and sometimes from simply refusing to sign on the dotted line. And that's a lesson worth far more than $200.